We are back on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk, 1180. On April 15th, 1912, 100 years ago, the RMS Titanic, the largest ship afloat at that time, hit an iceberg. 2.5 hours later, the ship broke up and sank bow first with over 1,000 people still on board. 2 of those people that died that night are the subject of a great new book, A Titanic Love Story, Ida and Isidor Straus, by June Hall McCash. Our guest by phone to talk about her new book is June McCash. June, welcome to Taking Care of Business.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
June, what a great love story.
Yes, it really is. They're amazing people.
How did you decide to do this? What made you think of doing their story?
Well, there were a couple of things. I found out the amazing outpouring of support and love following their deaths. They had one memorial service that 40,000 people in New York turned out to attend. They weren't even able to open the doors for the service because they were afraid people would be crushed to death, since the hall held only 700 people. The other thing was seeing the James Cameron film where he depicted the couple lying together in bed, which was not at all the way it happened. And I felt I needed to set this story straight. But they're such remarkable people. I also had a thought about Ida Straus. I had lost a husband, and before he died, he said to me, "Is there nothing you wouldn't do for me?" And I thought about that a long time.
Ooh.
Few of us have the opportunity to test that depth of that love.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's
as
see.
She did.
As she did. As she did. This is a great American story. I mean, you've got German Jewish immigrants who became co-owners of Macy's. What a great story! And you follow it from the beginning. I mean, their entire story.
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. The book actually opens with the sinking of the Titanic and closes with the sinking of the Titanic. But when Isidor's children found their father's autobiography, which they didn't know he had written, it was a very short autobiography, only about 50 pages, but they were just overwhelmed and charmed by the beginnings of their family in America. Their grandfather had come as a peddler, and he had settled in the state of Georgia, driving a wagon from plantation to plantation, and in one generation they had managed to own Macy's department store. They left the South following the Civil War and after the destruction of Columbus, Georgia, where they were living at the time, and came to New York and got a new start. It's a pretty amazing story.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things you talk about is there was an anti-Semitic slur that got them to move and I think changed their entire lives.
Right. They were living first in a little town called Talbotton, Georgia, where Isidor's father had opened a little store. And because there had been a lot of profiteering during the Civil War among all segments of merchants, the Jews were singled out, and the town council had a presentiment against the Jews in that area. Well, Isidor's father was the only Jewish merchant in the town, and decided it must be directed at him as well as others, and he decided to move. They said, "Oh, no, we don't mean you." But every single member of the council came and asked him to stay, but they felt that they had to move on, and they moved to Columbus, which was a larger town with a larger Jewish population.
We're seeing that same thing today where the Jews are being singled out, unfortunately. And the Jews are a major part of the business community as they were back in their days.
Absolutely. Well, as late as their late years, there was still that kind of anti-Semitism that prevailed in America. Isidor had written a letter of support to get his grandson into a very elite school in New York, and the headmaster wrote back and said, "I'm sorry, if we accepted Hebrew children," as he put it, "all of our Christian children would leave." And it's hard to imagine that kind of attitude today, but it was prevalent then. And these were among the wealthiest of New Yorkers, and very, very good people, philanthropists, well known throughout the city. It was really quite a shocking letter to find among all the many letters I read of the Straus family.
I thought the ship, the Titanic, was supposed to be unsinkable.
So did most of the passengers, but that turned out certainly not to be the case. And I think that's one of the fascinations we have with the Titanic, with the hubris, the pride, the arrogance, in a sense, of the builders of the Titanic, asserting that it was unsinkable, and we saw that nature managed to find a way to sink it in any case. But I think it was partly that hubris and partly the amazing people who were on board and the wonderful stories that emerged from there, and none more so, I think, than that of Ida and Isidor.
We are visiting with June Hall McCash, author of A Titanic Love Story, Ida and Isidor Straus.
You know, June, I was looking through the book, and I noticed you have several pages of photographs. Where did you get all these photographs?
Oh, all over 40. There were over 60 photographs and 40 pages of photographs in the book. Most of them many of them, I should say, came from the Straus Historical Society, which is a family collection. I got some from the Library of Congress, some from the New York Public Library, in various collections around the country. And one or two family members were able to contribute other photographs. Many of these have never been published. And they tell the story of Isidor and Ida, as well as his most remarkable brothers. One of his brothers was the first Jewish ambassador from the United States. He was ambassador to Turkey under 3 different presidents, and he was the first Jewish cabinet member under Teddy Roosevelt. Ida, in her own right, was a very creative and wonderful woman, very family oriented, of course, but she also was very she was an artist, and she raised her children with honor and dignity and a great sense of loyalty to family and to others who were less fortunate than them.
Wasn't Isidor in the House of Representatives too at one time? For at least
he was. Mm-hmm. He served one term from 1894 to 1896 in the House of Representatives. He was not cut out to be a congressman. He didn't really seek the job, but he was elected anyhow and chose never to run again. He didn't like being separated from his family, and he really didn't like the slow pace of Congress. He was a very decisive man, accustomed to making decisions, and it simply wasn't the way things worked in Congress at the time, or today for that matter.
You know, one of the comments that you made, we saw in some of the material that I've been looking at, is that if you're going to be taking a cruise, this is not a book to read.
That's an interesting comment. You know, the one thing, of course, that I think we ought to emphasize is the fact that both of these people could have been saved. Ida chose not to get in the lifeboat. She was offered at least two opportunities to get into a lifeboat, and she simply refused because her husband wasn't going to follow her in the lifeboat. And she said to him, "We have been together 40 years, and I would rather die with you than live without you." And those, as far as we can tell, those were pretty much her exact words. Oof. There were many eyewitnesses to this event. Isidor did not enter, because, first of all, there had been an order by the captain, do not, women and children first. And on the port side of the ship, that was being interpreted in a very literal manner, so that no men were allowed on the lifeboats. On the starboard side, however, if there were no more women and children standing around, men were allowed to board the lifeboats. And Isidor could have gotten on the lifeboat. He was actually offered a seat, and he said, "No, I won't accept any privilege not given to the other men." And he was a very honorable man and felt very strongly about that. I think there was a question for them of honor and loyalty, and they were willing, and love, of course, and they were willing to give up their lives for that. Pretty remarkable.
Oh, yeah. When we come back from the break, I want to talk to you about how faithful you think the movie was to the Strauses, and as opposed to the 1958 movie, A Night to Remember, which to me seemed to be a little more faithful. But let's talk about that when we get back, okay?
Okay.
We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk 1180.